A door closed by hand, yet always open again. Why? Welcome to Vale Files. I am your host, Thorn. I'd love to know, where are you joining from tonight? Comment below. Your presence makes every tale unforgettable. Now, the story. A Sherlock Holmes story. It was upon a bleak November morning that Holmes and I found ourselves once again at Baker Street when an unusual visitor arrived. The fog outside was so dense that the hansom cab which bore him was but a shadow until the horse's hooves struck the cobblestones at our very door. The man who emerged was of middle years, sharply dressed but pale, as though he had passed a night without rest. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he asked, stepping into our sitting room with a nervous bow. Holmes inclined his head, his eyes glinting with that peculiar sharpness which always signified that his mind had already begun dissecting the stranger before him. "You are recently come from the south, sir. The chalk dust upon your boots speaks of Surrey, and the faint odour of linseed oil suggests the company of painters or craftsmen. Am I right?" The gentleman gave a startled exclamation, but Holmes waved him into a chair. "Pray compose yourself. Your case will not wait upon courtesies. Tell me what brings you here." The man introduced himself as Mr. Charles Whitcomb, a barrister residing in Norwood. His household, he told us, was plagued by a most confounding occurrence, one which had shaken both his wife and his servants into a state of near terror. "It is a door, Mr. Holmes," he said, his hands clenching the brim of his hat, "a door which refuses to remain shut." I could not help but smile at what seemed at first a trivial matter. Yet Holmes, far from dismissing it, leaned forward with sudden intensity. "Explain yourself fully, Mr. Whitcomb. It is the door to the study," our client continued. "Every night I secure it with key and bolt, yet come morning, without sound or disturbance, it is found open. Nothing within has been stolen, but papers are disturbed, drawers half pulled, as though some unseen visitor had passed through in the night. I have changed locks, added bolts, even set a chair against it, but still, each dawn it stands ajar. My wife swears she hears no sound. My servants are terrified, and I—" Here his voice faltered. "I fear for my reason." Holmes steepled his fingers, his expression unreadable. "And you are quite certain, Mr. Whitcomb, that no member of your household is playing tricks upon you?" "I would stake my profession upon it," the barrister replied firmly. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Then we have before us not a jest, but a problem of the most intriguing character. A door that will not stay shut, drawers disturbed but no theft committed, and all without sound." He rose suddenly, his long figure silhouetted against the misty light of the window. "Watson, this is not a matter to be trifled with. We shall go to Norwood at once, and—" So began what I would later call one of the most curious and disquieting adventures in my chronicles of Sherlock Holmes, the case of the door that refused to stay shut. Mr. Whitcomb sat for some moments in our armchair while Holmes, with that gentle despotism which he exercised over all who came within his orbit, pressed upon him a cup of coffee and bade him give the narrative in its strictest order and without rhetorical ornament. The barrister proved to be a man of method, which suited Holmes's humour. He took from his breast pocket a folded memorandum of dates and notes, and having cleared his throat, set out the sequence of events with professional exactitude. The occurrences, it seemed, had begun a fortnight prior, and had repeated themselves on 6 occasions, never on consecutive nights, but irregularly, as if the unseen agent observed the household's patterns and chose his opportunities with perverse intelligence. The door in question gave upon a small but handsome study at the rear of the house, looking out upon a narrow garden, and beyond it a lane bordered by the backs of other properties. The study had 2 windows fitted with interior shutters, a marble fireplace, bookcases to either side, and a partner's writing table against the inner wall. The door was stout oak, newly waxed and furnished with a brass mortice lock, a Yale night latch, and a supplementary bolt fixed at the lower panel. This last an addition made by the master of the house after the 3rd incident, when the disorder had become so marked as to shake his wife's nerves. "Of keys," said Holmes, who had listened with closed eyes and fingertips together. "Pray be precise. Who holds them, and how many exist?" "Two to the mortice lock, Mr. Holmes. One in my possession, one in my wife's, though she rarely has occasion to use it. The night latch may be set from within and snapped shut from without. The bolt, well, it is but a simple slide. It has no key." Holmes opened his eyes. "And yet you find the door ajar of a morning with the bolt retracted each time. You changed the locks after the second occurrence, you said." "I did." "Excellent. You placed precautions of your own devising." Here the barrister coloured slightly as though confessing to a schoolboy stratagem. "I have, on 2 nights, sifted a light sprinkling of ash from the scuttle along the sill and the corridor parquet, only the barest veil to catch, if possible, the trace of a tread. In the morning there was none. I also set a chair beneath the handle on the 5th night. It was found moved back a foot, as if something within had thrust it." "Within, you say?" murmured Holmes. "Not without?" "The legs left tracks in the grain of the polished floor." "It went inward." Holmes made the smallest motion of satisfaction. "And what of the windows?" "Latched from within and undisturbed. The shutters likewise, save once, when the right shutter bore a minute chip at the lower hinge as of fresh pressure." "I thought it trivial." "Nothing is trivial," said Holmes, "only unexplained." "Your servants?" "4. Briggs, my butler of 10 years, Mrs. Lister, the cook, Ellen Pierce, our parlour-maid, and a boy, Thomas, who answers to the groom, though we keep but a single horse and trap. Briggs sleeps on the ground floor near the kitchen, the others above. My wife has been of delicate health since the spring. She takes a draught at 9 and retires. I am often at my papers until late. On 4 of the nights I sat there until 2. I closed the door behind me, turned the key and set the night latch and slid the bolt. On rising in the morning I found it open, or standing on the latch, with drawers disturbed and papers shifted. Once the carpet corner near the hearth was turned back. Nothing is taken." "You are certain?" said Holmes. His voice, though mild, had in it a note which compelled the most conscientious stock-taking. "Certain. I keep a catalogue of the papers in my deed-box and docket the briefs upon my table. The disorder is a fisherman's disturbance, stirring the water, taking nothing." Holmes leaned to the light and regarded our client with those grey eyes which, when quickened by interest, held a hard brilliancy. "You have changed locks, added a bolt, set ash traps, wedged a chair, and you bring me a list of dates. You, sir, are both a lawyer and a man under siege. Allow me 2 or 3 small points. You came to us at once this morning. You have not broken your fast beyond a cup taken in haste. You travelled by hansom, not from your house, but from the Norwood station after first going there afoot, and, if I am not grievously mistaken, the study has been lately dressed with fresh paint or size, for the smell of linseed, though faint, clings most to your cuffs, and not at all to your coat, which would be the case were the odour from a public room." Our visitor half rose. "Upon my word." "Pooh! The sleeve has brushed a drying surface at some time when your coat was off." "Spare me the romantic inference. It is merely useful." "Pray, the room is under renovation?" "Only in small part," said Whitcomb. "I had a panel mended where the wood had cracked with last winter's damp, and the skirting touched by the joiner. A tin of oil and 2 brushes were left by the man in the scullery overnight, 3 days ago." "Ah," said Holmes softly. "You lock the door when you leave the room." "Who locked it last night?" "I did." "And you slept soundly?" "As soundly as a man may who expects the impossible." "Watson," said Holmes, turning to me with a flicker of humour, "we have before us either an agency that passes through solid oak, or an agency that persuades oak to behave as if it were air. When matter is disobedient, it is generally because mind elsewhere has made arrangements." He rose, took his Inverness from the peg, and sent a glance over the littered breakfast table which might as easily have been a general's survey of a map. We must see this door while the morning is young and the smells, marks, and temperatures are as they chose to be in the night. Mr. Whitcomb, can your time permit? My time, Mr. Holmes, is at your disposal. Then we shall trouble you to endure our company to Norwood immediately. Watson, your hat. Within 20 minutes we had quitted Baker Street. The fog hung in turbid folds above the shop fronts and lay like wetted wool along the curbs, but the main arteries were already astir, and our cab rattled south with that peculiar, muffled cadence which London's November lends to iron and hoof. Holmes, who is seldom communicative upon the road when his mind is engaged upon the end of it, sat with chin sunk and eyes half-lidded, yet I perceived, from the occasional motion of his thin fingers upon his knee, that he was constructing that mental diagram by which he arranged facts into their inevitable positions. Mr. Whitcomb, after a period of strained silence, ventured an apology for the strangeness of his appeal. You must think me fanciful, Mr. Holmes, to make a pilgrimage for what others would call a trick of hinges and draughts, Holmes stirred. Sir, when a hinge misbehaves, it squeals its confession. Yours is dumb and admirably trained. A draught leaves heedless testimony in candles, dust, and the temper of curtains. Yours leaves none. Your ash-trap told no tale. Your chair was moved from within. Your bolt, which obeys only the hand behind the door, was found retracted. You have offered me a small stage and a very clever curtain. I am engaged by the promise of the drama behind it. Whitcomb swallowed visibly and sat straighter, as if a weight had shifted from one shoulder to the other. There is one matter I did not know whether to trouble you with, he said at last. On the fourth morning, when I found the door again ajar, I observed the faintest smear, no more than a dark crescent, upon the lower panel near the bolt. I wiped it away without thinking. Later, I could not rid myself of the notion that it had been graphite, like the smear a locksmith's hand might leave. Holmes's eyes opened entirely. And you wiped it away? I did. Do not distress yourself, said Holmes kindly enough. The past is a locked drawer. We must content ourselves with the present desk. He turned to me. Watson, pray note, a smear at the lower panel, exactly where a hand must lie to retract the bolt, if that hand were nearer the floor than yours or mine. You suggest a child? I asked. I suggest nothing, he replied. I only keep my shelf tidy. But the faintest shadow of a smile passed over his lips. We left the main road and took a narrower lane bordered with hedgerow black as a lace against the pale fog. Presently the cab drew up before a sober brick house of modest Georgian aspect set back from the road, with a short path, a square of lawn, and the ghostly skeletons of 2 lime trees flanking the steps. A butler of angular build, whom I took to be Briggs, opened to Mr. Whitcomb's key and admitted us with constrained civility. He was a man whose self-respect was a well-brushed garment. One could see he felt the house's strange visitation as an affront to his office. My wife is upstairs, said our client in a lowered tone. She has been much disturbed. If you will follow, Mr. Holmes, the study is at the rear. Holmes paused in the hall. He inhaled once, lightly, as a hound will taste the air. His gaze travelled with that put-on indolence I knew so well across the hat-stand, the umbrella pot, the runner upon the stairs, the bell-pulls, the framed mezzotant of a hunting scene whose glass showed a faint veil of moisture. He stooped at the threshold as we passed toward the back and touched a fingertip to the parquet, lifting it with a small, bright speck. Not ash, he murmured to himself. Plaster dust. Very fine. From above, not below. Then aloud, you have had some slight work done, Mr. Whitcomb? The room above the study, my wife's dressing room, was replastered in part after a small leak, said our client. But that was in the spring. Leaks are chronic, said Holmes, even when cured. We reached the end of the passage. Whitcomb halted, and with a face that betrayed more agitation than he would have wished, he gestured toward a handsome oak door with the new brass furniture he had described. The handle was of the modern oval type, the keyhole fresh scored with the fine half-moons of recent use. I saw also upon the lower panel, at a height scarce a foot from the floor, a polish irregularity which might have escaped any but a trained eye. Holmes's gaze lingered there, moved to the skirting, then to the jamb where the bolt's socket had been mortised. "If you will permit," he said, and took from his pocket a small magnifying lens no larger than a shilling. He went upon one knee and peered with painstaking patience at the grain of the wood, the metal of the bolt, the hairline of the latch, and the verge of the threshold. He said once, and again, with two tones that told me more than a paragraph. He rose, tried the handle, examined the plate of the Yale night latch, then, turning to Whitcomb, asked quietly, "And the windows within? Shutters latched, you said?" "Yes." "Good. We will go in together, but first," he pointed to the bolt, "be so good as to draw this, and then with your key set the mortice. I prefer to see the door as you leave it of a night." Whitcomb complied. Holmes, in the instant before the bolt slid, watched the tongue of the lock as narrowly as a watchmaker regards a spring. "Now open it." The barrister turned the key and pushed. The door resisted with a courteous firmness until the bolt was retracted, then came inward with a soft release that spoke of good hinges. The study within had the sober masculine comfort which any man who loves his books might envy. The partner's desk stood as described, a deed box upon it. On the hearth a coal fire burned with an even glow. To the right a small ladder stood against a bookcase where certain volumes had been recently shifted, the absence of dust making a pattern like an inverted skyline. Holmes crossed once to the window, tried the shutters, and found them secure. He crossed again to the hearth and, with a hand held just above the carpet, moved his palms slowly from the grate outward, as if measuring the breadth of the room. He did not touch the carpet's edge, but he looked at it, and his look remained for the space of 2 heartbeats at the corner nearest the fender. "You observed this turn back once?" he said. "I did." "And you replaced it?" "At once." Holmes nodded. He turned to the desk. "Your papers, sir, are as you left them last night?" "I believe so," said Whitcomb. He approached with the anxious caution of a man who fears to disarrange the very evidence he craves. Holmes forestalled him with a slim, gloved hand. "If you please, do not touch. Watson, observe the upper right drawer. The edge is polished more brightly along the first inch than the rest. A twitching hand used to rapid extraction and insertion will make such an alteration in time. Here the time has been short. Mr. Whitcomb, who sits at this side?" "Myself." "Then the twitching hand was yours, but the brightness is newer upon the lower left, which you rarely use. Someone ignorant of your habits tested both." He bent again to the lower panel of the door and smiled in his thin fashion. "And someone, moreover, who finds the world from a vantage nearer the floor than ours." "A child?" I could not keep the word from my lips. "Or a man who works upon his knees," Holmes replied. "A joiner, a layer of carpet, a sweeper of chimneys, or a burglar who takes pains. Our noses will tell us which he breathed lightly along the wood. That faint odour again. Oil, as of tools kept decent, not a house's general varnish. There is also the memory of damp lime in this passage. I do not find it in the study, and yet the dust on the hall floor was from above. It is remarkable how an honest house will confess if you speak to it in the morning." He straightened and gave at last a brisk shake to his shoulders that told me his plan, if not complete, had taken on a skeleton. "Mr. Whitcomb, you shall indulge me a small experiment before luncheon. I shall need a length of black thread, a candle end, a pinch of flour, and the smallest bell you possess. Also, Briggs's time for 10 minutes, and, if he will forgive me, the loan of his keys. I am to be today a housemaid and a carpenter by turns. We will set our door tonight to tell us whether it opens from a mind without or a mechanism within." "And if it should open again?" said our client. "It shall," returned Holmes calmly, "but it shall report its method with improved manners. Meanwhile, Watson, we have a house to take the measure of, from dressing-room to scullery. There is a crack mended in the panel, a chip at a shutter's hinge, a carpet that once lifted, and a bolt polished where a lower hand has lain. Each of these, like a juryman, has a little voice. We must be patient to hear them agree." He turned to our host with a grave courtesy. "You have done wisely to consult me, Mr. Whitcomb. I will trouble you for a plan of the rooms above and below this study, and for the names and hours of all who have lately set foot in the house under the pretext of honest labour. We shall find that the door which refuses to stay shut is less obstinate than the mind that contrived the trick of it. Let us begin." Holmes at once fell to pacing the chamber, his eyes darting from shutter to hearthrug, from desk to bolt socket, as if he were mapping in his brain the very pulse of the room. Mr. Whitcomb, uneasy under the detective's scrutiny, stood by the partner's desk, twisting his hat in his hands. I, for my part, tried to take in what might be gleaned by ordinary senses, but the solemn quiet of that panelled chamber offered no overt answer. It seemed to me a lawyer's room such as 100 other barristers might possess, orderly and sober, with its black-letter volumes, its gas sconce, and the faint odour of tobacco mingled with the coal smoke from the grate. Holmes broke the silence with one of those abrupt queries that reveal the steady march of his reasoning. "How long have you resided in this house, Mr. Whitcomb?" "Nearly 8 years, sir. We removed from Lincoln's Inn when my practice became sufficient to maintain an establishment beyond town, and until this fortnight the study door was of unimpeachable character?" "Entirely so. No irregularity of any kind, nor change of servant?" "None, save the scullery boy. Thomas joined us in June." "Ah," said Holmes. He tapped the window frame lightly with a finger. "The bolt, the lock, the night latch, all of these have only human agency for explanation. The question is, whose agency? And we must not allow our fancy to race ahead of our facts. Watson, what do you make of the air here?" I inhaled dutifully. "Close, perhaps. I detect coal smoke, polish, and, yes, an oil of some kind." "Just so," said Holmes, "but note that the polish is recent, rubbed in streaks rather than circles. A hand worked here in haste, concealing what it had no right to display. There is a nervousness in the very gleam of the panel." He knelt again, his magnifier in hand, and traced the lower groove with the delicate motion of a surgeon's probe. "There is wear here, gentlemen, which does not correspond to 8 years of use. It is the wear of days." Only Whitcomb let out a low exclamation. "But what purpose? Why tamper with my very door if not to gain entry?" Holmes gave one of those rare smiles that were less mirth than recognition of a pattern revealed. "Because, my dear sir, this door is not merely a barrier, it is a stage. Someone has taken pains to persuade you that the room is entered by means which defy bolts and locks. To what end? To unseat your reason, perhaps, or to discredit your household, or—" his tone grew harder, "to ensure that when a theft is at last committed, you will be too dazed by apparitions to trace it to its mortal author." The barrister's hand shook upon the desk. "Holmes, you terrify me more than the door itself." "That is good," Holmes answered simply. "Terror sharpens the faculties. Now you mentioned no theft, but disorder, drawers disturbed, papers shifted. You are a barrister. Might there be a document within these walls whose abstraction would serve an enemy, though its loss might escape your eye for days?" Whitcomb coloured, and after a moment's hesitation admitted, "There are certain conveyances and deeds entrusted to me by clients, pending proceedings. They are of some value, yet I believed them secure in the deed box." Holmes wheeled to the desk, tried the lock of the box, and noted the keyhole's edges with his glass. "The wards here have felt a key other than yours. The scratch lies across the grain, not down. I should say a false key, fitted with haste, and withdrawn when it balked. They sought, and not finding, turned to mischief with carpets and chairs to prolong the charade. I could not help an exclamation. Then the true danger is not a phantom door, but a very present burglar? Holmes's eyes gleamed. Exactly, Watson. And one who takes pains to write his entrance as a ghost story in order to mask the very human tale beneath. That is art, Watson. Poor art, for he has betrayed himself, but art nonetheless. At this moment Briggs entered with the flower, thread, and bell Holmes had requested. Holmes took them as a musician accepts his instruments with brisk nods. Good. Now, gentlemen, observe. We shall prepare the stage anew. If our ghost reappears, he shall find himself compelled to ring for us. With deft hands, he drew the thread across the lower panel, affixed it to the bolt, and attached the tiny bell such that the least movement of the slide would sound a chime. He sprinkled flour across the sill in the faintest veil and melted the candle end into the angle of the jamb, its wax catching the thread like an anchor. To see Holmes crouched there in his Inverness cape, arranging domestic trifles into a trap for an invisible adversary, was to witness genius at its most economical. "Now, Mr. Whitcomb," he said at last, rising and dusting his knees, "you and your household must go about your affairs as if this visit had never occurred. Tonight you will retire as usual. I shall request the use of your guest chamber for Watson and myself. We will see what caller disturbs your door when honest folk sleep." Whitcomb assented, though with visible apprehension. As he left to confer with his wife, Holmes drew me aside. "Watson, mark it well. The scratch upon the deed-box, the polish at the panel, the chip upon the shutter. Each sings in unison. There is design here, not caprice. I would learn what man, woman, or child has so intimate a knowledge of this house as to venture thus boldly. You suspect the servants? I suspect nothing yet. But, I observe, Briggs's gait is too stiff for stealth. The cook's hands are heavy. The maid Ellen, perhaps, or the boy Thomas, these may have the agility required. But we must not blind ourselves with the obvious. Our phantom may wear another household's livery altogether, the remainder of the day passed in sober inspection. Holmes, with Mr. Whitcomb's reluctant consent, questioned each servant with that grave courtesy which disarms the simplest soul. Briggs was affronted at the insinuation that any under his watch could be dishonest, yet Holmes pacified him with compliments on his well-polished silver. Mrs. Lister, the cook, swore she had heard nothing save the clatter of coals in her grate. Ellen, the parlour-maid, trembled when Holmes fixed her with his gaze, but protested that she slept soundly in the attic chamber. Young Thomas, when called, shifted from foot to foot, his eyes darting. Holmes dismissed him with a pat on the shoulder, but I noted how long he stood watching the boy depart. When evening drew on and lamps were lit, Holmes and I supped with our host in a strained silence. The barrister's wife did not descend. She was said to be indisposed with nerves. At 10 o'clock Holmes begged leave to stroll in the garden. I accompanied him. The night was still, the fog dispersed, and a waning moon hung over the hedge. Holmes stood by the garden gate, examining its latch with his glass. "Too rusted," he muttered. "Not used in months. Yet see the prints at the flower-bed, narrow soles, not a gardener's. They lead to the back lane. You think our intruder enters here?" I whispered. "Perhaps. But no door or gate explains the bolt withdrawn from within. That puzzle remains." At 11:30 we retired to the guest chamber adjoining the study. Holmes extinguished the lamp and lay upon the coverlet, his thin silhouette motionless. I, less at ease, watched the faint glow of the fire across the hall and listened to the heavy tick of the long-case clock below. Midnight passed, then 1 o'clock. All was silent. It was at the stroke of 2 that it came, a faint metallic scrape, followed by the almost inaudible slide of wood on wood. Then, as Holmes had contrived, the bell gave a delicate chime. Holmes's hand gripped my wrist in the darkness. We rose as one and stole to the study door. It stood ajar, the thread slackened, the flower disturbed. Within, the fire glowed faintly. Holmes thrust the door wide. The room was empty. Yet upon the carpet, plain in the moonlight, lay the imprint of a small bare foot, pressed in flour, and pointing not to the door, but toward the hearth. And upon the hearth-rug itself, turned back as Whitcomb had described, yawned the faint outline of a square, as though a trap or hidden panel lay there, awaiting discovery. Holmes's voice, low and certain, broke the silence. "Watson, the door is but a diversion. Our true passage lies beneath the rug. The hand that lifts bolts is the same that lifts panels. Now the play begins." Holmes was upon his knees in an instant, his long fingers pressing at the edge of the hearth-rug with the delicacy of a pianist searching for a chord. The square outline, faint but definite, lay revealed in the moonlight, a suggestion rather than a certainty. Yet to Holmes it was as if the boards themselves had confessed. He peeled back the rug with a swift motion, exposing a portion of the polished oak floor. There, where the grain should have run uninterrupted, a subtle join betrayed itself. A frame cut into the boards, cunningly matched in colour, but not immune to the scrutiny of Holmes's glass. "You see, Watson," he whispered, his voice vibrating with suppressed excitement. "The door has never been the problem. The true entrance is here, concealed in the very heart of the room. Whoever has intruded upon our barrister's study has come not through lock or shutter, but through the floor beneath our noses." I bent close, my heart thudding with a mixture of disbelief and anticipation. A trap-door, then? But what passage could it conceal? "The foundations must be solid enough," said Holmes, "but no house is without its arteries. Old drains, disused cellars, coal chutes. London is riddled with forgotten channels. The clever rogue does not force the barred portal when the earth itself yields a corridor." Holmes pressed experimentally upon the edge. The panel refused to budge. He reached into his pocket and produced a thin-bladed knife, working it with infinite patience along the seam until at last a faint click sounded. The square lifted half an inch. Together we raised it. A black gulf yawned beneath, exhaling a breath of damp earth and mildew that struck cold against my face. A narrow ladder descended into darkness. Holmes lowered the candle stub he had carried from his preparations earlier. Its flame revealed a crude shaft bricked in roughly, leading down 8 or 10 feet into a tunnel beyond. The flower upon the carpet bore the print of the small foot we had seen, leading straight to the opening. Holmes's eyes glittered. "Observe, Watson, the bolt retracted not by sorcery but by touch from below, a rod perhaps thrust through some cunning aperture. The intruder ascends by this ladder, disturbs the chamber, and vanishes whence he came. We must know where this passage leads. I confess a shiver passed through me at the prospect." "You would descend now?" "Not yet. The bird, if clever, will not be caught twice in one night. He knows nothing of our presence. We shall not alarm him by rash pursuit, but tomorrow in daylight we shall trace this artery to its other mouth. For now we replace all as we found it. Mystery thrives in disorder, but it dies in symmetry. Let our ghost believe he still holds the stage. With care we lowered the panel and drew the rug back into place. Holmes examined the flower again, noting each mark, before scattering it anew with the tips of his fingers. Then we withdrew silently, leaving the study door ajar as it had been discovered. Holmes did not speak further that night. His mind was busy with the map of unseen passageways, and I knew better than to disturb its construction. The morning brought a pale sun through the Norwood fog. At breakfast, Whitcomb listened aghast as Holmes revealed what we had discovered. "A passage beneath my very study. Good God, sir, how is it possible? The house was built by reputable hands, and no plan I possess marks such a contrivance." Holmes accepted his coffee with equanimity. "Yet contrivance it is." "Do not reproach yourself, Mr. Whitcomb. The most honest house may conceal the mischief of a prior age. What matters is that it exists, and that it has been used. I propose we descend this morning, you, Watson, and I, with lanterns and stout sticks. But first, I would ask, has anyone in your household complained of noises, draughts, or other oddities beneath stairs? Whitcomb frowned. Mrs. Lister spoke once of draughts in the cellar, though I attributed it to gaps in the old coal chute. The boy Thomas, too, muttered something of sounds at night like scuffling, but I dismissed it as his fancy. Not fancy, said Holmes firmly. We shall test it. Within the hour, lanterns lit, we had opened the concealed trap and descended cautiously into the earth. The air was rank with mould and old brick. The tunnel extended straight for some 20 yards, narrowing as it went, before turning sharply. The floor bore marks of passage, smudged prints, fragments of candle wax, and once a broken matchstick trodden underfoot. Holmes examined these with keen delight. One intruder, perhaps two at most, both small of foot. They carry light but cheap, for the wax is common tallow. Their purpose is not mere mischief. They have trodden this way many times. Observe, Watson, the smoothness of the wall here, where a shoulder brushed it again and again. We pressed on until the tunnel opened abruptly into a low, vaulted chamber. The walls were lined with ancient brick, damp and streaked with salt. Rusted hooks protruded here and there. A pile of rotting boards lay in one corner, and in the centre stood an old iron-bound chest, its lid half open, revealing mouldering ledgers and scraps of parchment. Whitcomb recoiled. This is beneath my house? Holmes bent over the chest. Not beneath yours alone. See this wall? It is but a partition. The chamber extends farther beneath the neighbouring property. I should say this was once a wine cellar or store, bricked up and forgotten until some ingenious mind rediscovered it. He rifled gently among the ledgers, careful not to break their decayed spines. Shipping accounts, he murmured. Dates from 40 years past. Ah, and here a contract, half-eaten by damp. This cellar has history, Watson. It has served merchants, perhaps smugglers, before it served burglars. And now it serves someone who desires access to your study, Mr. Whitcomb. The barrister stood pale and shaken. But why my study? Why not any house on the lane? Holmes straightened, his lantern throwing a long shadow on the wall. Because, sir, of what you keep there. Your documents are bait. Whoever plays this game seeks one in particular. They have not found it yet, but they will return until they do. I ventured to ask, and who then are our suspects? Holmes gave a thin smile. Ah, Watson, here the chase begins in earnest. We have a passage known perhaps only to one who explored these foundations, a hand small or cunning enough to slide a bolt unseen, a foot bare or slippered that leaves but a child's print. We must ask ourselves, who in this household, or without, has such knowledge, such motive, such daring? We returned to the daylight with relief, leaving the damp chamber to its silence. Holmes directed the panel replaced and the rug smoothed once more, but his instructions to Whitcomb were stern. Say nothing to your servants. Let the play continue. We must watch who grows uneasy under the knowledge that their stage has been discovered. I shall set certain traps tonight, more delicate than thread and flower, and we shall see who walks into them. That afternoon he busied himself with a series of small contrivances, fine hairs stretched across drawers, a pinch of chalk dust at the shutter's hinge, and a wafer of soap balanced upon the bolt. To Whitcomb, bewildered, they seemed child's toys, but I recognized in each the quiet brilliance of Holmes's method, a snare to capture the unseen hand. Evening drew in once more, and with it the tension of waiting. The house lay hushed, each servant moving with exaggerated quietude, for rumour of the detective's vigil had spread despite Whitcomb's caution. Holmes and I again retired to the guest chamber, lanterns ready but concealed. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the sigh of the wind and the faint creak of timber as the house settled. At last, shortly after 1, the bell Holmes had contrived the night before stirred faintly, then was still. Holmes rose, silent as a shadow, and I followed. We approached the study door. This time no scrape of bolt announced itself, but when we entered we found the rug again shifted. The square of the panel gaped open. Holmes raised his lantern. A figure was crouched upon the ladder, half emerged from the blackness below. It was small, slight, and barefoot. The face turned upward into the light, and I caught my breath. It was the boy Thomas, the groom. His eyes, wide with terror, blinked in the glare, and he stammered incoherently, clutching something against his chest. Holmes seized him by the collar and drew him into the room. The object fell to the carpet with a dull thud, a folded sheaf of papers bound with ribbon bearing the seal of Whitcomb's chambers. Whitcomb himself, roused by the commotion, burst in a moment later, his face livid. "Thomas, you! What devilry is this?" The boy collapsed to his knees, sobbing, the ribboned papers at his side. Holmes stood over him, calm, his hand upon his chin. "So, Watson, the foot was not spectral after all. The phantom is flesh and blood, and very young flesh at that. But why he risked so clever a stratagem for these papers, that, I think, will prove the heart of our mystery." Thomas knelt upon the carpet, his frail shoulders shaking as though each sob threatened to break him apart. The boy looked scarcely 15, though want and hard labor had carved deeper lines into his young face. The ribboned sheaf of papers lay beside him, glaringly out of place upon the hearthrug where moments before the secret panel had gaped. Mr. Whitcomb stood over him, his voice thick with indignation and disbelief, but Holmes raised one hand for silence. "Gently, sir," he said, in that calm, commanding tone which never failed to steady the most turbulent moment. "The boy is more terrified than culpable. Let him breathe, and he may give us what violence would never draw from him." Thomas raised his blotched face, eyes darting from Holmes to his master, then back to the floor. "I didn't mean no harm, sir," he whispered hoarsely. "I swear it by all I've got." Whitcomb gave a short, incredulous laugh. "Not mean harm? You creep through hidden passages, rifle my papers, and yet prate of harmlessness?" Holmes stooped, his gaze level with the boy's. "Not so fast, Mr. Whitcomb. You observe that he carries these documents openly in his hands, not concealed about his person. That argues compulsion rather than design. Tell me, lad, who set you to this task?" Thomas twisted his hands, mute. Holmes's eyes hardened. "Watson, fetch a glass of water. His sobs are as much fear as remorse. Let us coax truth, not wring it." I complied, and after a sip, the boy seemed steadier. His tale came haltingly, words tumbling out in frightened bursts. "It weren't my idea, sir. A man found me in the lane. Weeks ago, said he knew things about me. Things as'd shame me if told. He said I must do as he bid or he'd have me sent to jail. He knew I'd once been in trouble for pinching apples from a cart. He said one more brush with the law and I'd be ruined. He showed me the trap under the rug and told me how to slip in at night. Said I was to fetch certain papers, nothing more. I never wanted to. Honest, I didn't." Holmes leaned forward. "Describe this man." Thomas swallowed. Tailish, with a thin face and a scar at the chin. Wore a dark coat, carried himself like a gentleman, though he spoke rough when angered. He promised me money if I brought what he asked, but when I hesitated, he threatened me instead, said he'd tell master I was a thief already. Whitcomb's anger gave way to bewilderment. But what papers could he desire? Which of my clients has an enemy so desperate? Holmes picked up the sheaf Thomas had dropped and examined the ribbon seal. "These bear the stamp of the Chancery suit you mentioned yesterday, do they not? The case of Elmridge versus Harrowby?" The barrister started. "Good heavens, yes. They are but transcripts and drafts, not the originals, but within the box is also the deed of conveyance itself. If that were stolen—" He broke off, visibly shaken. Holmes's expression grew intent. Then our scarred gentleman is no idle housebreaker, but one with precise legal designs. Thomas here has been but the cat's paw, chosen for his youth and weakness. The true architect lies elsewhere. The boy burst out afresh. I never touched no deed, sir. Only what he said. He gave me the key. He showed me how the bolt might be nudged up with a wire through the crack. But I swear I never took aught save these papers. Please believe me. Holmes laid a hand briefly upon his shoulder. I do believe you, Thomas. You are guilty of folly and weakness, but not of malice. Still, we must not blind ourselves to the fact that you became instrument of another's plot. That plot, mister, Whitcomb, threatens your honour and your practice far more than any mere childish theft. Whitcomb had sunk into a chair, his face pale. Holmes, who can it be? The opposing solicitor? A client turned traitor? If that deed were lost or forged, the suit might be overturned, my reputation ruined. Holmes's eyes narrowed, and he began that restless pacing which always signalled the quickening of his mind. We must reason backward. First, who has knowledge of this hidden passage? Not many. It is unlikely Thomas stumbled upon it unguided. The scarred man showed it to him. Therefore the scarred man knew of it already. How? Not from casual chance, but from prior intimacy with the house or neighbourhood. Second, who profits from the theft of documents in Elmridge versus Harrowby? That case involves disputed land, I believe. An estate near Norwood, Whitcomb confirmed faintly. The conveyance of title is at the core. Harrowby contests that Elmridge's claim is false. If the deed vanished, Harrowby's counsel would triumph. Just so, said Holmes. And who, pray, is Harrowby's solicitor? Whitcomb's brow darkened. A Mr. Jasper Kelway. A clever but unscrupulous man, ever eager for advantage, yet surely even he would not stoop to this. Holmes gave a short, sardonic laugh. I have met men who stooped far lower for less. Still, let us not leap to names until proof supports us. We must catch our scarred gentleman in the act. He will not rest while the deed remains beyond his grasp. Tonight's failure will but whet his appetite. He will return, and when he does, we must be ready. The boy, still trembling, looked up imploringly. You won't send me to jail, sir? Holmes regarded him gravely. That depends on your conduct henceforth. If you aid us honestly, you may yet redeem yourself. Will you swear to tell me each word, each gesture of this man when next he contacts you? Thomas nodded vigorously. I will, sir. I swear it. Good. Then you shall remain in the house, outwardly unpunished, that he may not suspect betrayal, but you will be watched. A single false step, and I deliver you myself to the law. Whitcomb, though still shaken, bowed to Holmes's judgment. So be it. You have my trust. Only guard my papers, I beg you. My whole career hangs upon them. Holmes placed the sheaf back into the deed box, locking it with deliberate care. Fear not, sir. Tonight the intruder has shown his face in part. Tomorrow we shall compel him to reveal the rest. Watson, we shall require a vigil more elaborate than last night's. This time the trap must close not upon a boy, but upon the hand that guides him. The remainder of the night passed in heavy silence. Thomas was sent to his bed under Briggs's watchful eye, while Holmes sat smoking in the dim lamplight, his eyes gleaming through the smoke wreaths. I ventured one or two questions, but he waved them off with his usual, "Data, Watson, data." Let us not theorize without material. Morning brought little respite. Holmes dispatched a note to a contact at Scotland Yard, requesting discreet assistance should we need it. He spent several hours examining the tunnel more thoroughly, measuring its breadth, noting its branches, and dusting the ladder rungs for traces of fresh wax. His satisfaction grew when he discovered upon one rung a smear of candle grease mixed with black fibres of cloth, as though brushed by the coat of a man descending in haste. Not the boy's doing, he muttered, holding it to the light. He climbs with bare hands and thin shirt. This is our scarred friend's signature. He was here in person. That afternoon, Whitcomb was called to chambers in town and Holmes insisted he go, urging him to betray no hint of our suspicions. The enemy must think his stratagem continues unobserved. Meanwhile, we shall prepare our net. The net, as Holmes conceived it, was simple but deadly. In the study, he replaced the deed box with a replica, into which he placed worthless papers bound with a false seal. The genuine documents he concealed elsewhere in the house. A thin layer of powder was sifted upon the floor before the desk, invisible save to the trained eye. At the trapdoor he stretched a second thread connected to a small bell in our chamber, and in the garden he placed a watchman from the yard, stationed quietly by the back lane. As night fell, the household retired. Holmes and I lay in readiness, every nerve taut. Midnight passed, then 1 o'clock. All was still. At 1:30, the faint chime of our hidden bell stirred the air. Holmes touched my arm, and together we crept to the study. The rug was shifted, the panel open. A lantern's glow flickered faintly below. Holmes motioned me back and concealed himself behind the door, crouched like a hunter. I followed suit, pistol ready though my hand trembled. The ladder creaked, a figure rose through the opening, taller and broader than Thomas. The scar upon his chin caught the light as he turned his head. He carried a short iron crow which he set against the box upon the desk. In that instant Holmes sprang forward, seizing him by the wrist. The man cursed and lashed out, but Holmes's grip was steel. I rushed to his aid, and between us we bore him to the ground, the crowbar clattering across the floor. The intruder struggled like a wild beast, but the arrival of the watchman from the garden ended his fight. Shackled at last, he lay panting, the scar upon his chin livid in the lantern light. Holmes regarded him coolly. "So, Watson, our phantom door yields us no spirit, but a solicitor's agent, I think. Now we shall see to what extent law and crime are bedfellows in the case of the door that refused to stay shut." The man lay upon the carpet where we had pinned him, his chest heaving, the cords biting his wrists. In the wake of that furious struggle there fell the kind of hush which follows thunder. The lamplight trembled upon the walls and threw the scar on his chin into a hard relief. Holmes, who never allowed triumph to overtop caution, stooped at once to secure the fellow with a strap from the travelling rug, then felt rapidly along his sleeves and pockets with the neat, impersonal movements of a surgeon examining a case rather than a man. "Observe, Watson," he said evenly, producing a small leather roll and unrolling it upon the desk. A pick, a tension tool, a set of false wards, and, a tube of graphite. Our smear upon the lower panel is explained. Here, too, red sealing wax upon the cuff, and a smear of lampblack upon the right thumb. A night worker, and no stranger to offices where documents are sealed and resealed. If he were not a clerk once, he has at least made a clerk's business his study. The prisoner glowered up at us, lips drawn back from his teeth. He was of that ferret-like breed which London breeds in its poorer courts, thin, supple, and dangerous. Holmes took him by the chin, turning his face to the light with a courtesy that was oddly more humiliating than roughness. "You have been ill-shaved since morning. The line upon your jaw shows a hand not your own. A barber in Kennington, I think, for the lemon cologne is of a sort they favour there. You carry upon your coat a breath of printer's ink, and upon your boots the gritty dust of a cellar. Your name I do not yet know, but your trade is clear enough." "I'll give you no name," he growled hoarsely. "You've no right—" "My right," said Holmes, "will arrive in a moment, upon 2 steady feet, and a hat too small for his importance. Hark! They are upon the steps now." He was right. A brisk tread crossed the hall, and Inspector Lestrade, trim and spare as ever, presented himself at the door with a constable in tow. "Evening, Mr. Holmes. Doctor?" He nodded. "Your note came to hand, and I thought I'd best bring a man." "Well, well, what's this? Have we picked a plum already?" "A plum with a stone, Lestrade," said Holmes lightly. "Take care of your fingers. The gentleman is agile when loose. He was in the act of transferring a deed box to his own custody when we detained him. Lestrade's eyes brightened. "What's your name, my lad?" The man set his jaw and stared at the skirting. Holmes waved a hand. "Waste no breath. He is one of those who would sooner bite his tongue in two than betray his employer, for the first hour. After that, even oak weathers. Meanwhile, let us look to what cannot lie." He lifted the man's left wrist and displayed a bracelet of plaited horsehair, such as grooms sometimes fashion idly from the animals in their care. "Curious ornament for a gentleman cracksman. You were in the stables this very evening, and recently, for the hair is clean and not yet matted. Our house has but one horse and one boy. You have used the boy, and to keep him tractable, you mimicked his world." That was shrewd. At the sound of this, Thomas, who had lingered white and shamefaced by the door, gave a gasp. "He's the man, sir, the very man!" "He said he'd ruin me if I spoke." The prisoner shot him a look of such concentrated malice that the lad shrank behind me. Holmes's eyes softened for an instant. "Enough, Thomas. You have made a fool's compact and paid already. Keep your courage steady now and your tongue straight, and you may yet sleep with a clear conscience." He turned to Lestrade. "We will lodge our friend with you for the present practice." Holmes made a slight, impatient gesture. "Your practice, sir, rests upon the truth, not upon shadows. We will give your enemies the one and deprive them of the other. For the present, I charge you, go to your bed and sleep. Fear is a poor counsel. Watson and I will keep watch." He turned to the boy. "Thomas, you will lie down fully clothed and answer to my call at daybreak. If you attempt flight, it will be the ugliest morning of your short life." The lad gulped and vanished. Holmes and I resumed our vigil until the pale seam of dawn showed between the shutters. He spoke little, but I could feel the current of his mind, strong and cold as a winter river, bearing him towards some point ahead, which my own vision could not yet descry. At 9 o'clock a note arrived from Lestrade, written in his precise, cramped hand. Prisoner gives his name as Hugh Vale, refuses particulars. On his person were found a card case with no cards, a key impression in soap, and a receipt from W. Cribben, house decorator, Norwood Road, for mending of panel and skirting, dated 3 days prior. Await instructions. Holmes's nostrils dilated the merest fraction. "Vale," he repeated, "it will do. The receipt is better. Do you recall, Watson, the odour of linseed upon our client's cuffs? I fancied a joiner. Here he is, in black and white. He or his principal engaged work within this very house. There are thieves who enter like cats, and those who enter like carpenters. Our man is of the latter sort. We broke our fast hastily. Holmes would not allow so much as a crumb of discussion until he had put eyes upon W. Cribben. By 10 we were upon the Norwood Road, where a modest frontage displayed the legend Cribben and Son, house painters and decorators. A pale young man with putty upon his sleeve and a paintbrush stuck absurdly behind one ear. "Vale has brought the order, sir, not Mr. Kelway. I don't know the names of your gentlemen. We did the panel and the skirting in a hurry, we did." Holmes's face expressed only a bland interest. "Just so? And the little, what shall we call, inspection panel you put where the carpet hides it? Ingenious work. Mr. Vale was particular, I dare say." The fellow laughed with the relief of one artisan who thinks him understood by another. "That weren't our doing, sir. The little trap was there from old times. Wine cellar hatch, mister," Vale said. "We only planned it true and smoothed the joints so it wouldn't catch. We left a tin of oil, as he told us. Holmes turned away a fraction, so that the youth could not read the quick gleam in his eye. Of course. And Mr. Vale, where may a message reach him? Here, sir, if you like. He comes and goes, else at Mr. Kelway's rooms in town. He said so, he did." The poor fellow recognized his blunder as the words left him. His hand went to his mouth. "Beg pardon, I'm not to—" "You have done no harm," Holmes said, and tossed a coin upon the counter. "For your trouble." In the street again, he permitted himself a quiet, almost affectionate, "There, Watson." He hailed a cab to Chancery Lane. "We will not find Mr. Kelway at his name upon a brass plate, but we may find the smell of him in the stair." The offices in question proved as sober, and which yielded, under Holmes's knife, into the cellar of the adjoining house. This house, which fronted upon the lane, was untenanted, so the board outside declared. But within there were signs of a recent, secret life: a crate used as a table, a stub of tallow, a bottle reeking of paraffin, a pad of paper upon which squares and rectangles were ruled with almost legal exactness, and on the earth near the wall the faint oval left by the bottom of an iron-bound chest, set down and lifted again. Holmes moved among these poor relics with that absorbed attention which turns rags into affidavits. "Forger's tools, no but a place where a forger might plan," he murmured. He lifted the pad and brought it close to his face. "They have drawn the study by memory, Watson. The desk, the shutters, the hearth. See here, the deed box marked with a cross. And here a note: seal, copy, exact, replace. There is our method. They had no need to steal at all if they could substitute. If last night we had slept 1 hour longer, our friend would have left you your box and your ruin sealed within it." At that instant, the far-off bell of the Whitcomb house clanged with an urgency that set my nerves on edge. Holmes's head came up like a stag's at the cry of hounds. "Hark!" he whispered. Through the cellar's dust-choked window there came the distant clatter of a cab before the house, and, a moment later, a woman screamed. Holmes did not wait for the end. He took the stairs 3 at a time, I panting at his heels. At the landing, the smell of oil was stronger, and under it the chalky tang of fresh plaster, our old sentinel of mischief, speaking now in a shout. We burst into the dressing-room. The window hung wide, the plaster about the sash was newly scored. On the rug, a dark bottle lay tipped, its contents leaking a shining trail. Beside it, a woman's smelling salts rolled, uncapped, and Mrs. Whitcomb, supported in Ellen's arms, stared at us with eyes dilated in terror, but unhurt. Holmes flung himself to the window. Below, upon the narrow strip of garden, a man in a dark coat and bowler was already running for the lane, his head half-turned, his jaw showing, for the merest instant, in profile, the pale seam of a scar catching the light like a thread of ice. Holmes's hand went to his pocket and came away empty with a little exclamation of annoyance, as human as any I have heard from him. "No pistol," he said between his teeth. "My wits must serve." He was down the stairs again and across the hall before I had done assuring the fainting lady that she was safe. In the garden he did not take the gate, but the lime tree, swarming up with the agility of a schoolboy and dropping on the far side as the fugitive reached the lane. I followed as best I could, and from the lane's corner I saw my friend gain upon the man with every stride. The fellow cast a look over his shoulder, saw what was behind him, and darted not for the open road but for the very door of the untenanted house we had quitted. He vanished within. Holmes was 2 seconds later. When I reached the threshold, Holmes's voice rang from the back like the crack of a whip. "Stand, Vale!" he shouted. "One more pace and you step into Scotland Yard." There was a snarl, the crash of a shoulder against a door, and then a second voice, cool, official, and extraordinary two-edged sword. Vale stared at us, his chest labouring, and said in a voice suddenly hoarse and flat, "You've overreached your hand. You think you've got him, but you've nothing. I never named him." Holmes's eyes rested upon the scarred jaw as a falcon's upon a rabbit's back. "You will," he said, with wearied certainty. "If not to me, then to the little room at the yard with the green paint and the long hours. Men of your trade endure your master's contempt for as long as it profits them. It ceases to profit at 3 in the morning. He turned to me with that swift transition from flame to coolness which I have seen 100 times and never ceased to marvel at. "Watson, Mrs. Whitcomb must be soothed, and the paraffin lifted before it stains. The house must be set in order. Tonight we shall have callers, the kind that wear broadcloth and speak the language of the law. We have snared the hand. Now we must engage the brain. I think Mr. Jasper Kelway will not long leave his agent to dangle in the wind. The scarred man was led away between Lestrade's constable and the inspector himself, his struggles dying into a sullen silence as the handcuffs bit. Holmes lingered in the lane, his eyes upon the shuttered windows of the neighbouring houses, as though the very bricks might yet yield him a confession. When he returned into Whitcomb's hall he was grave but composed, brushing the soil of the lime tree from his sleeve as if it were but an incident of a morning walk. "Mrs. Whitcomb, now pray leave the arrangements of the next scene to me. Lestrade will see to his prisoner. The law must not yet be stirred save as I choose. Let Kelway suppose his agent has met with a trifling mishap. Let him venture near to mend it. We shall be waiting." That day passed in a hush of expectancy, each member of the household moving softly, as though fearful to disturb the charged air. Holmes permitted no visitor, yet dispatched Thomas with a note, carefully phrased, to Lestrade, instructing him to allow Vale no ink nor paper, and to report any messenger or solicitor who might press for access to him. The boy went pale at the errand, but obeyed, clinging to the hope of redemption which Holmes had held before him. Throughout the afternoon my companion busied himself with small, meticulous acts which betrayed the intensity of his thought. He re-examined the powder sprinkled upon the floor, noted where Vale's boots had disturbed it, and compared the prints with those left the night before. He made Ellen recount with exactitude the cry she had uttered when the intruder burst into the dressing-room, then had her repeat it at intervals along the hall, so that he might measure how far it carried. He asked Briggs to oil the hinges of the garden door until they swung without a whisper. He even timed the long case clock's chime against his own watch, muttering, 2 seconds slow, we must be exact tonight. I confess I grew restless under such apparently trivial labours, but I knew better than to interrupt. In Holmes's world, the smallest thread, if placed with care, might bind the greatest adversary. At 5:30, as the lamps were lit, a card was brought by Briggs upon a tray. Holmes took it up with a look of satisfaction. "Just so. Mr. Jasper Kelway begs the honour of a word with Mr. Charles Whitcomb upon a matter touching the Elmridge suit. He has chosen his moment well. Watson, you perceive that our bird comes to the snare of his own wings." Whitcomb, who had turned paler at the name, stammered, "I cannot meet him, Hinder." Holmes, standing by the mantel with his back to the fire, inclined his head slightly, offering no hand. "Pray be seated, Mr. Kelway. Mr. Whitcomb is indisposed, but he has placed me at liberty to hear whatever you wish to communicate." The solicitor's brow puckered. "Indeed? And you are?" "Sherlock Holmes," my companion said simply. I shall never forget the flicker that passed over Kelway's face, a twitch at the corner of the mouth, a quick contraction of the pupils, an instant's faltering of the jovial mask. But he recovered with practised speed and laughed heartily. "Ah, yes, the famous detective. Well, Mr. Whitcomb does himself credit to retain you. I feared, you see, that his nerves might be unequal to the strain of this litigation. I came only to assure him of my respect and to suggest—" Holmes cut him short with a gesture, his eyes gleaming. "Spare us, sir, the embroidery. You came to gauge whether your agent's errand of last night had succeeded, and to learn what fate has befallen him. You came because your plot trembles, and you must know whether it stands or falls." For the first time, the colour drained from Kelway's face. He rose half from his chair, then sank back, forcing a smile that sat ill upon his lips. "Really, Mr. Holmes, this is most extraordinary. I am here in the strictest courtesy." "Courtesy does not carry a scar upon the chin," Holmes snapped. "Courtesy does not instruct a boy to creep like a rat through a neighbour's floor. Courtesy does not plot to substitute forged deeds in a rival's box. Enough, Mr. Kelway. The law may forgive a clever trick upon occasion, but it will not forgive one so clumsy as to leave prints in flour, wax upon a cuff, and a partner who sells his employer's name for a sovereign. Kelway's bluster failed him. He sat hunched, his thick fingers twitching upon his knee. "You have no proof," he muttered. Holmes's eyes bored into him like augers. "Proof is the breath of my profession. I have discreet. Refuse, and you shall answer in open court not only for fraud, but for conspiracy." The man sagged in his chair, utterly broken. "You have me, Mr. Holmes. God help me. You have me." Holmes dictated swiftly, his words precise as chiseled stone, and Kelway scrawled his signature with a trembling hand. When at last he stumbled from the house, his shoulders bowed, Whitcomb emerged from the adjoining room where he had listened unseen. His face was a study in relief and wonder. "Holmes," he said huskily, "you have saved me from ruin. How can I ever repay?" Holmes raised a hand, forestalling him. "Repay me by keeping a stricter guard upon your trust, sir. When papers are as precious as gold, they must be watched as gold is watched. The cleverest thief is not he who breaks a lock, but he who persuades you the lock is bewitched. Remember that, and you will not be so troubled again." The household seemed to breathe once more, the spell broken. Ellen went about with quieter step, Briggs resumed his stern dignity, and even young Thomas, chastened and pale, began to hope he might yet earn forgiveness. As for Holmes, he only lit his pipe and gazed into the fire, his thoughts already straying to fields beyond Norwood. That night, as we rode back to Baker Street, I could not forbear remarking upon the strangeness of it all. A door that would not stay shut, a phantom visitor, and in the end, a solicitor's greed. Truly, Holmes, the world holds no end of odd disguises for crime. He smiled thinly through the smoke. Disguises, Watson, are but curtains upon a stage. Pull them aside and the same actor stands revealed. Human folly, human avarice, human fear. In this case it was avarice in a lawyer's coat, but tomorrow it may be envy in a maid's cap, or revenge in a soldier's tunic. My task is ever the same, to hear the faint note beneath the music, and to name the hand that strikes it. Sharply, and a moment later, Billy ushered in Mr. Whitcomb, whose countenance at once dispelled any notion that his troubles were ended. He had the overwrought look of one who has walked rapidly without rest, and with much upon his mind. In his hand he carried a long blue paper, with the ribbon of the court affixed. "Holmes!" he burst out, "I am undone yet! See here, this morning a clerk from the Chancery Division came with notice that Harrowby's counsel has lodged a certified copy of my conveyance. They brazen it out. They will put it before the court that the deed I hold is not the deed the court holds. The judge will be shown a counterfeit more official than my original." Holmes took the paper and read with compressed lip. Copy certified by the Clerk of Enrolments, Somerset House, received and filed. So they move at a pace. And this copy, you say, is of your deed? Of mine, or rather of what they would have mine be? The language, the parties, the date, these they name, but if they have altered so much as a boundary, Harrowby may contrive to claim all. My reputation is at stake as much as the land Holmes's eyes kindled. We will see, then, whether a counterfeit carries the right blood through its veins. Be easy, sir. Last night we plucked at the hand. Today we touch the pulse at the wrist. Watson, your hat. We shall first look upon this copy with our own eyes, and then we will look upon the man who carried it from pen to file. Within the hour we were at Somerset House. It was one of those iron-grey mornings when London's great offices wear their sternest face. Clerks moved like sombre ants along corridors that smelt of paper and dust. Holmes, who could assume any air he chose as lightly as another man puts on a glove, presented himself with the brisk assurance of a solicitor's principal, and, after short parley, obtained sight of the lodged copy in a quiet room under a clerk's supervision. He spread the sheet delicately upon the table and bent to it with his lens. I watched his eyes travel, in one smooth glide, over seal, wafer, ribbon, engrossed text, marginal initials, watermarked paper, and the faint bruises left by the press. Then he straightened and smiled with the faintest exhilaration. "Clumsy and yet dangerous," he murmured. Note, Watson, the watermark H. Talbot and Son 1893, too late by a year for a deed purportedly executed in 92. See also the ribbon. We have our alum and cochineal. The yard dies leave an iron mordant. Here, the impress of a seal ring. True enough. But the wax lacks shellac and crumbles at the edge. And these marginal initials, imitated with a hand that knows how to tremble at the right strokes and yet repeats its tremor like a machine. Most damning of all, observe the slight smutch of lamp black where the wafer met the ribbon. Vale carried lamp black last night. Our counterfeit has his thumb upon it for those who will look. The supervising clerk, who had grown increasingly uneasy under Holmes's quiet commentary, drew himself up with official indignation. Sir, you speak lightly of the custody of this office. Holmes turned upon him a look of weary patience. My good fellow, the custody of every office is as strong as its weakest conscience. Who received this yesterday? Mr. Colebrook, sir, of the enrolments. Holmes's eyes flicked to me. We shall renew our poor acquaintance with humanity, Watson. He wrote a line upon his card, and in 3 minutes more we were shown into a smaller room where a slight, colourless man, with ink-stained fingers and the curious furtive air which belongs to those who have spent too long in whispers, awaited us. Holmes addressed him with courteous dryness. Mr. Colebrook, my name is Sherlock Holmes. A deed copy has been filed within your purview, which bears marks of a counterfeit. Before I disturb your superiors, I give you the opportunity to prefer the protection of candour to the peril of obstinacy. The man's Adam's apple jerked. I know nothing of... Holmes laid upon the table, one after another, a series of small items, a flake of ribbon dredged from his dish, a pinch of the alum residuum, a scrap on which he had made a rubbing of the marginal initials, and at last his card, upon which Jasper Kelway's late signature lay like a spider that had died in distress. Your choice, said Holmes very gently, is not between speech and silence, but between speaking to me here and speaking at a very public bar. You did not invent this fraud, you allowed it to pass. A man whose chin is seamed and whose temper is prompt with paraffin brought it with a word from a bolder man, florid and jovial, whom you took to be your friend. The sovereign he set upon the corner of your blotting-pad has lodged, with singular fidelity, upon your conscience. Shall the rest of the sum be paid in years? Colebrook crumpled, as if the breath had gone from his body. He sank to a chair and began, in a thin voice, to pour out the miserable tale. Vale had come first with a note from Mr. Kelway and a draft for inspection, hinting broadly that a little expedition would be appreciated. The draft became, by a second visit, a copy certified, with Kelway himself speaking jovially of saving the court's time. Colebrook, weak and wanting money for a sick sister in Stepney, had winked and stamped and looked away. Holmes let him run dry, then said sternly, You will write now a full statement of these facts and sign it. It will go with Mr. Kelway's to the inspector at Scotland Yard. Pray be precise as to days and hours. If you vary by so much as a comma when you repeat this, you will taste the inside of a cell. We did not linger. As we stepped back into the damp air, Holmes's nostrils widened as if he were taking in, with the common fog, the shape of some invisible pattern. The case, he said, has reached that moment I cherish, when men who fancied themselves puppeteers find the strings tugged at their own wrists. Come, Watson, we must put this evidence beneath Whitcomb's roof before another door refuses to stay shut. Yet the door had its last caprice still. We reached Norwood to find Briggs at the gate, his austere face riven by agitation. Mr. Holmes, sir, another note, brought by a ragged lad. He would not come in. He said it were for you by name. Holmes took the folded paper, broke the wafer, and read. His expression altered not at all, but a spark sprang into his eye. He passed it to me. The message, written in a cramped, clerkly hand, ran, If you would have Kelway speak plain before night, Come alone at 3 to the back parlour of the Grapes in Lambeth. Bring no police. The door will be unlatched. A door again, Watson, said Holmes softly, and turned the paper to the light. Note the hand, a clerk's, but not our colourless Colebrook's. This has more muscle in the downstrokes. A third conscience seeks to leap free. I fancy a go-between in Kelway's rooms, someone who saw too much last night when his master returned, shaken, and wishes now to sell clean hands for a price. We will indulge him. Mr. Whitcomb implored Holmes not to hazard himself, but my friend only smiled. I have carried my skin through less reputable taverns than the Grapes. Besides, I shall not go alone. How could I, with so excellent a chronicler as Dr. Watson at my elbow? Lestrade waits within whistle at the next corner, whether our correspondent like it or no. The Grapes proved a melancholy house set among timber wharves, with the river's breath at its door, and a yellow, watery light filtering through panes filmed with age. We passed through a low bar, the landlord eyeing us with that bovine incuriosity which is sometimes the keenest prudence, and found the back parlour unoccupied save for a small fire and a cracked mirror garnishing the mantel. Holmes tried the handle. As promised, he murmured. Unlatched. We had waited no more than 2 minutes when the door opened and a man slipped in with the quick, rabbit-like motion of one who expects pursuit. He was young, sandy-haired, with that haggard pallor which comes of too many late nights over too many petty wrongdoings. He started at sight of us, then seeing Holmes alone and ununiformed, came to the table and sat, licking his lips. You are Mr. Holmes. I am Arthur Blenkin's clerk to Mr. Kelway. I wrote, I cannot be drawn into this. I never... He broke off as Holmes's gaze held him. You shall be drawn out of it, Mr. Blenkins, if you will. Speak plainly. He leaned forward, his hands trembling. Mr. Kelway's done for. I heard him last night, after you left, storming at Vale. He bade me send word to a man at the registry to stand firm and to burn a draft I had copied. I did not burn it. From the inner pocket of his shabby coat he drew a folded sheet and laid it down. Here is the draft of the deed as Mr. Kelway wished it changed. He meant to alter the description to carry over the boundary garden, half an acre, but worth thousands when the new road goes through. He said Harrowby would be grateful and that no man could prove the change. When he returned today, near noon, and found the police had Vale, when he learned you had been to Somerset House, he told me to pack and follow him to Brighton by the 4 o'clock. He is going to run. I will not go to jail for him. Holmes's hand fell lightly upon the paper. You will not if you follow my instruction as quickly as you have abandoned your master. First, you will come with me at once to Norwood. Second, you will set down before witnesses the matter you have told me. Third, you will sit in Mr. Whitcomb's study while I write 2 notes, one to Lestrade, to meet the 4 o'clock at Victoria, the other to a learned friend in the court, to forestall any mischief with this lodged copy. If you falter in any of these, you will presently share Mr. Kelway's lodging behind iron. The young man swallowed, nodded, and rose. Holmes' eyes were bright and cold as winter stars. Watson, our final chase is a prosaic one. It ends upon a platform at 10 minutes to the hour. It is not my habit to embroider scenes with needless speed, but there was that in our race to Victoria which stirred even my sober pen. The hansom lurched and swayed. Holmes sat forward, his hawk profile turned toward the cab's small window, every line of his body leashed like a hound at the slip. At the great terminus itself, the clock marked 6 minutes to the hour when we sprang to the Brighton platform. Lestrade, trim and imperturbable, rose from a bench as if he had been waiting all day to display his imperturbability. "End of the line, Mr. Holmes?" he inquired with dry relish. "If you please, Inspector," Holmes returned, and his hand indicated, without seeming to move, a florid gentleman in travelling cloak and soft hat, who paced by the bookstall, his eyes forever sliding to the station entrance, and then away again. He had a small bag in his hand, and the uneasy swagger of the man who longs to appear brisk and free while counting the seconds. Lestrade's touch upon the arm, the quiet word, the momentary struggle of a man who suddenly finds the hardness in uniformed cloth. All this took but a dozen heartbeats. Jasper Kelway's ruddy colour went the unhealthy white of tallow, his bag fell, and a corner of a ledger showed where it gaped. Holmes looked not at his face, but at his hands. "Ink yet damp upon the pads of the fingers, Watson," he murmured. He could not part from his drafts until the last instant. Men love their own cleverness more tenderly than any child. Within the hour we were again at Norwood, where, under Holmes's direction, Blenkins wrote and signed his statement, Colebrook's was added to Kelway's, and Lestrade, content now to drop the mask of irony, spoke with open admiration of the manner in which my friend had drawn the line of proof from hearth slab to law court, and thence to station platform. Mr. Whitcomb, overwhelmed, could at last do no more than wring Holmes's hand, until I feared for its bones. Holmes, who bore gratitude as he bore reproach, lightly, only smiled his thin smile. "You will sleep tonight, sir, and tomorrow set your house in order. Have your deed examined by a scrivener of probity. Keep your box where eyes and hands are honest, and above all, teach your door to obey by the simplest of methods, namely, by allowing no rogue to touch its bolt. We must presently answer to a knocking greater than any in Norwood." As we took our leave in the fog-laden dusk, he glanced back once down the passage where that obstinate door stood quietly in its frame, the rug smoothed, the panel flush, the bell at rest. "There are doors in London, Watson," he said, as our cab turned its nose to Baker Street, "that refuse to stay shut because men's minds will not. But when the mind at the back of the bolt is arrested, wood and brass submit, as honest materials should, to ordinary hinges." He relapsed into thought, the ghost of a smile touching his austere face. I knew the look and kept my peace. The case, though already secure by any practical measure, had still its last turn to come, when Holmes would draw the thread before our eyes and show us how neat a pattern it had always been. Holmes kept silence upon the drive back to Baker Street, his profile keen against the glass as the lamps went by like dull yellow planets in a low firmament. Once only he spoke, and then as if to the fog rather than to me. "There remains," he said, "one door to close. We must shut it so that it will not again be opened by any rogue of average cleverness. Then the case will pass from the stage to the ledger." Before noon we were again in Norwood. The household, which had lived for 2 days as upon a drawn breath, seemed at last to inhale. Mrs. Whitcomb received us downstairs, pale, composed, and very gracious to my friend, with that manner of English gentlewomen who meet peril by tightening the ribbon of their dignity. Thomas hovered in the background like a penitent altar-boy. Briggs was stone once more, but his stone had warmed. Holmes would have no thanks and little talk. He asked first for a carpenter's brace and the smallest shell bit to be found, then for a hand mirror and a length of pianoforte wire. Briggs produced these with a severity which could not conceal his zeal. Holmes carried them to the study, and there, with us as his audience, he undertook the quietest, oddest performance I have ever seen him give. "Before we write the closing lines," he observed, "we should have the courtesy to the facts to invite them once more to speak for themselves. Watson, you will oblige me by taking the part of the door. Mr. Whitcomb, if you will be so good as to be the house. I shall play the rat." He drew back the hearth-rug and lifted the panel with the same neat ease as on that first night. The breath of damp earth came up. He set the mirror in the shaft to throw a fan of light, and descended. I lay upon my stomach at the opening as he had directed, so that I might see by the mirror what he did below. He spoke without lifting his voice. "You will observe, Watson, that the tunnel runs not only to our neighbour's cellar, but also in a meaner branch under the passage itself. When Vale had cribben true the hatch, he took a second liberty. he bored with just such a shell bit as this, a hole on the inside of the skirting where the bolt's tail passes behind the jamb. The hole opens into this pocket. His fingertip appeared in the mirror, indicating a dark crescent just within the frame, and from below a wire can be introduced to it easily. It is the simplest thing in the world if you are a patient criminal with an auger and a night to yourself. He pushed the pianoforte wire up. On the panel above, scarce a foot from the floor, where we had once noted a smear, its bright end winked and settled into the little cavity behind the bolt. Holmes gave it the gentlest draw. There came, like a whisper consenting to a request, the slide of wood upon brass, and the bolt glided back into its housing of its own accord. "You see," said his calm voice from the earth, "how a door may unbolt itself for those who prefer not to use it." He withdrew the wire and climbed up again, dusting his sleeves. The chair beneath the handle moved from within, as our client observed, because the bolt, once retracted, yields to the night latch. The latch, pressed by the wire's last movement, gave the door that inch of travel which nudged the chair. The ash mister. Whitcomb Sprinkled told no tale because Vale and the boy came and went by this mouth, not by the threshold. The smear upon the lower panel was graphite from Vale's tube, used to sweeten any stiffness where the bolt's tail rasped in its socket. The chip at the shutter's hinge belongs to an early essay. They thought, at first, to make a show of the window, and abandoned it when the draught whispered their clumsiness. The carpet corner, once lifted, was their rehearsal. Later they lifted the world that lay beneath it. It is all of a piece. Whitcomb bent to that small hole in the jamb as a botanist bends to a rare seed. "And to think," he murmured, "that's so vile. A labour could be done by so small a mouth. Most mischief," said Holmes, "goes in and out by a mouse-hole. Bring me, if you please, a plug of sound oak and a drop of glue, Briggs. We will teach this one to be less accommodating. There is no magic in a bolt when you remove from it the invisible fingers." While Briggs fetched the materials, Holmes sat upon the arm of a chair and regarded Thomas. "Now, lad, you have not run. That is promising. Have you thought what you will do with tomorrow?" Thomas swallowed. "If master keeps me, sir, I'll work twice the hours for half the pay till I've made it right." "Heroics are the refuge of those who dread arithmetic," Holmes returned, but not unkindly. "You will work the same hours for the same pay, but under Mr. Briggs's eye until that gentleman is weary of the sight of you. You will carry in your pocket for 1 year this—" He produced a small, neatly folded paper, "which is a copy of your statement, witnessed by Dr. Watson and myself, and you will show it to any man who offers you a short road. The long road is the only one that arrives." The boy's mouth worked. He nodded fiercely. Briggs returned with the dowel and glue. Holmes cut the oak true, drove it home with the heel of his hand, and smoothed the face with his knife until the scar in the wood was almost pretty. "There," he said, "we have taught our door to stay shut by respecting it." Lestrade arrived as the glue was setting. He had that air of modest contentment which with him replaces triumph. "Kelway is safe at the yard," he reported. "Your Blenkins has repeated his tale and signed, the registry man too. Vale has a tongue by fits and starts. I expect it will loosen at that hour you mentioned. The Crown will not lack for paper. Paper is well," said Holmes, "but juries have ears. We must give them an earful. Tomorrow you will ask Mr. Whitcomb to apply by counsel to have the court copy impounded and examined in the face of both parties. You will produce the die, the watermark, the wafer smutch, the registry stamp, above all, the statements. I will not myself be dragged into the limelight unless the dignity of the thing requires it, but if the judge should develop a taste for the manner in which doors behave when spoken to by wires, I shall gratify him." Lestrade's eyes twinkled. "You tidy your stage before you take your bow?" "Very proper. There is one point, Mr. Holmes, that puzzles me. How came Kelway at first to know of the hatch? If Vale did not discover it by chance, and it seems to me a deal of chance to trust, who showed him?" "Our decorator's receipt gives us the road," Holmes replied. Cribben and Son were in this very room 3 days before the first miracle. Vale brought the order, Vale had the plan. Vale is of that fraternity who live, like the rat, between floors and behind skirtings. Such men know, as a huntsman knows coverts, the old wine hatches and coal chutes of half a parish. He did not need to discover this one. He traded upon wisdom accumulated in a dozen winter jobs. Had Mr. Whitcomb engaged different hands, our visitor would have engaged a different door. The tool is made for the lock. The mind chooses both. Mr. Whitcomb looked at the oak plug, and then at his wife. "It is a heavy thing," he said slowly, "to learn that your house, which you took for an image of your honour, may be violated as readily as any other, and that it was your own habits, the hour you sat at your desk, the moment you went to bed, that taught your enemy his lines." "Take comfort," said Holmes, rising. "It was also your habit of keeping a catalogue and noting dates that told me mine. We are none of us so opaque to the world as we fancy. The wise man arranges his translucencies." He glanced to the mantel, where the deed box stood with its honest lid and seal. "One word more. You will keep this now in town with your bankers for the week. Rogues are like flies, kill the queen, and the hive is fooling still. Let us deny them sweetness," he had finished, to my eye, every thread of the practical fabric. Yet I saw that look come over him which I have learned to respect, a slight distance in the eye, a settling of the mouth that is not gravity so much as the last adjustment of a delicate instrument. He went again to the panel and stood for a moment looking down, not at the black square, but at the edge of the rug where the pattern, long rubbed by a man's heel, had been restored to order by Ellen's broom. "Watson," he said, "do you recall the impression upon the carpet on our first night when the bell chimed? The small, bare foot pointed not to the door, but to the hearth. That foot told us in an instant where to look. Had Vale been alone, he would never have left such an index. He trained the boy to go first for show and second for search because he wished Whitcomb to believe in a ghost before he believed in a thief. He understood that the shortest path to a deed box is sometimes made by walking through a man's imagination. That, he added with a faint weariness, is the newest method of our newest criminals, and it will not be the last we shall meet it." He turned to Mrs. Whitcomb. "Madam, forgive an impertinence from a stranger. Your courage last night saved trouble. Had you fainted clean away, your maids would have emptied the house for a doctor, and our friend Vale would have had his 5 minutes. You resisted, very imperfectly, but sufficiently. The law rests more often than it admits upon such imperfections." She coloured and made him a little courtesy. Toward evening, as we prepared to leave, there came a rap at the front door, discreet and double. Lestrade, glancing at Holmes, stepped behind the study door with his constable. I placed myself by the hearth. Briggs ushered in a gentleman with an air so carefully commonplace that it betrayed a lifetime's practice. He bowed to Whitcomb with precise moderation. "Mr. Wetzel Whitcomb, I am Mr. Travers, of Travers, Pollard and Company, scriveners to the court. I am directed to inquire whether a certain deed now in your possession may be submitted to inspection tomorrow, 9 o'clock, in chambers, the other parties attending." Holmes's eye flicked across the card and then to the man's hands. "You have walked the pavement from Victoria," he said mildly. "You carry dust upon the outer edge of your soul where the curb broke and you slipped. Pray be seated." The scrivener blinked, but sat. "It is merely a formality, sir." "It is the end of a very irregular process," Holmes returned. "We shall be present with the original, which has not left this room except to rest at my bank this afternoon. The copy lodged this morning will be impounded and examined. You will find, if your practice permits you the luxury of private opinions, that you have been made an instrument, as others were." Mr. Travers's mask trembled. "I am aware," he said stiffly, "that certain irregularities have been suggested." "It is not for me to say by whom, it is for you," Holmes answered, to see that tomorrow those irregularities are not prolonged. Good evening. When he was gone, Lestrade emerged, scratching lightly at his jaw with his forefinger, a sign with him of unusual satisfaction. I think we have them in a ring, Mr. Holmes. In a ring? Holmes assented, and with a ribbon through their noses. We shall not pull it hard unless they kick. He took up his hat. Watson, we will keep early hours. Tomorrow will be a day of small pins and exact placements. After that we shall have earned a pipe. I slept that night as a man sleeps after a march through rain. Holmes slept, I believe, not at all. At 7 he had me up with coffee and a curt injunction to have my boots polished with more discernment. You cannot present yourself before the court like a navvy's doctor. And by 8 we were again in Norwood to escort our client into town. Thomas watched us go from the step, his cap in his hands. Ellen waved from behind the parlour curtain. Briggs, immovable, permitted his lower lid to droop a fraction, which in him was emotion. At 9 precisely, we entered the chambers. I shall not weary the reader with the dry recital of that hour. There were the adversary's counsel, very smooth and very cool. There was Mr. Travers, now lieutenant, where yesterday he was envoy. There was the clerk of enrolments with a face like wet paste, and there, to my private amusement, in a rear seat as a spectator, that same long-lipped clerk from Kelway's offices, who flushed and looked away when Holmes's glance brushed him. Lestrade, respectful but omnipresent, was a brown sparrow among crows. Holmes did not speak until invited. When he did, it was to place upon the table, one by one, those trifles which he had first displayed upon our mantel, the ribbon, the wafer's smutch, the rubbing of initials, the note of watermark, the statement sworn. He added nothing theatrical. He merely drew with a fine point a line between each little fact and the next, like a surveyor making a map, and when the line reached Kelway's name, he set down his pencil and let the silence perform the rest. It was then that I understood the mood in which he had laboured over plugs and wires and powders in a gentleman's study. He was not content to have apprehended a villain. He must leave the truth so plain upon the wood that any honest hand might touch it and be reassured. When we came out into the corridor, Whitcomb took his arm. The man could not speak. He pressed Holmes's sleeve and turned away. Holmes watched him go with a kindliness that he seldom showed to those who made their living by paper. "There," he said softly, "is a mind whose door will henceforth obey him. Come, Watson. One errand more, and then we may submit ourselves to the consolations of lunch. There is a man in Kennington who scents of lemon cologne and sells a poor shave to poor rogues. It would be uncharitable to leave him unvisited when we are so near." I laughed, for I knew then that Holmes was content. And when Holmes is content, it is as if the city itself were a little more in order than it was the day before. Holmes's humour, once the chambers had disgorged us, was of that spare winter brightness which in him took the place of jubilation. We had left behind us a table strewn with trifles and a procession of gentlemen forced to look, for a few chill minutes, at the backside of their own industry. Yet my friend, who had engineered the sight, seemed less elated than intent, as though some small cog still needed setting true before the whole mechanism could be left to run. "The barber," he said, when we had quitted a hansom and turned down a mean Kennington street that smelt of paraffin and boiled cabbage, "is as much a registry as any office, Watson. He keeps the entries upon human chins. If Vale's movements have a pattern, we shall find their dates in another man's stubble." The shop was narrow, with a fly-blown mirror and 2 chairs, one occupied by a costermonger, dozing under a towel. A sharp-featured fellow with a flattened nose stood stropping a razor, whose edge he admired as if it were a sun. The air was heavy with lemon cologne. Holmes removed his hat with his most negligent grace. "Good morning, Mr. Jago. You favoured a client of ours yesterday, a tall, lithe man with a scar upon the chin and a temper that does not forgive a blunt blade." Jago's wrist paused upon the strop with the faintest catch, then resumed. "We get many chins," he said. his eyes upon the razor. "All of 'em want smoothing and none of 'em thank you after." Holmes took a coin from his pocket and set it upon the shelf. Then, with the movement of a man idly rearranging trifles, he shifted the bottle of cologne aside and revealed beneath it a folded scrap of newsprint upon which some punctual soul had jotted initials and hours. He did not touch it, he only looked, and the barber looked with him. "Tuesday, 9:45, said Holmes softly. "Friday, noon. Saturday, late," the note says, "after the grapes." And here, a second hand, heavier, has written S.C. "Jago, tell me of the gentleman who carries a cane with a silver knop and leaves his shillings face down." The flattened nose twitched. "He's no gentleman," said Jago at last. "He's a master that pays in threats." Came with scar chin twice, sat in the back chair and talked easy about court work, like it were a game at cribbage. Wears gloves that don't quite fit, and a ring that does. You'd call him a steward, maybe, one of them landmen what know where the hedges fall and where they can be pushed. I don't keep names, I keep faces. His is one as'll dodge in a crowd. "A steward," Holmes repeated, the corners of his mouth relaxing a line. "And does our steward favour any other shop within 100 yards? "The stationer 2 doors down," said Jago with a jerk of his head, "buys sealing wax as if he was eating it. And a little packet marked lamp black when he thinks no one looks. He looks like a man always thinking no one looks." Holmes's eyes warmed a degree. "You have shaved him well, Mr. Jago. Continue to do so, and you shall never lack for work." He set down a second coin, bowed to the coster, who snored, and in 3 strides had us out and into the stationer's. Mrs. Cattermole, dumpy, vigilant, and armed with twine, was not disposed to part with her ledgers, but Holmes, in the role of a harassed solicitor's clerk, with a client pelting him for copies and wafers, contrived to be at once so flurried and so exact that she at last relented to the extent of opening a book upon the counter and turning it toward us while she tied a parcel for an imaginary mister. James. Wax red, 12 sticks, W.C. and Son. Holmes read, like a man whose eye merely alights where habit guides it. Lampblack, small, W.C. and Son. Wafer, white. Paper, Talbot, 93. Paid by B on account. His finger tapped once and moved on. Curious, Watson, how the alphabet remains loyal to itself, even in ledgers. B visits where K hesitates to sign, and here, see the repetition, B returns the day after our first nocturnal visit to Norwood. Industrious Mrs. Cattermole, whose twine had reached its knot, looked up sharply. "There's no harm in a steward buying wax," she said, not without defiance. "Harm comes after, when gentlemen use it to stick their consciences." "Madam," said Holmes with a bow so grave that it appeased her, "you and I are of the same profession. We fasten what would otherwise fly open. I take the liberty of asking that if B should happen to come again within the day, you recall, by some accident, that you are out of wax. It is a charity to his soul. We left Kennington with 2 things more substantial than wax. First, the assurance that a third figure, no lawyer but the lawyer's country hand, had moved in concert with Kelway and Vale. Second, the knowledge that this personage had been, within the last 48 hours, uneasy enough to double his precautions at the very points our case had pierced. Holmes's mouth was a thin line. "Men," he said as our cab turned toward the river, "act not from natures but from situations." Kelway built the plan, Vale ran it in the dark, a steward oiled the hinges in daylight. Remove the plan and the runner stumbles, but the steward seeks to destroy the path. He will burn drafts, he will buy a ticket the moment the court breathes upon his ear. We must give him an errand to run the wrong way. By the time we had regained Baker Street, Holmes had written it. He sent Blenkins, now as docile as a chastened puppy, back to Kelway's office with a note to the effect that the safest of all safes is the one least suspected, adding 3 lines whose curious turns of phrase were such as a subordinate might employ when trying to sound like his master. The message named an hour after dark when Mr. T, meaning to any reader in that camp, Mr. Travis's clerk would be absent and the office unattended. It hinted that a certain duplicate, we had not the smallest intention that such a thing should exist, had been placed under the hearth tile in Kelway's inner room. "You bait with the smell the rat has taught himself to love," said Holmes, sealing it. "Blenkins will drop this into the hands he has used to dropping things. Lestrade will be hungry behind the wainscot. Meanwhile, we will put our client to bed with a draught of good news and forbid him to walk in his sleep." The afternoon wore into a windy dusk. At 8, we were posted, by Lestrade's arrangement, in Kelway's very chambers, the inspector and his man behind a screen, I within the shadow of the curtain, and Holmes absurdly at ease in the master's chair with his long legs stretched and his head tipped back as if he were composing a sonnet to the ceiling. The grate held a low fire. The outer office was dark, save for the pale wash of street lamps upon its frosted glass. There is a tension peculiar to such ambuscades which returns me at times to my old cavalry nerves, the body quiet as a gun in embrasure, the mind alive in every nerve. We did not wait long. A key turned softly. A man slipped in with that wary assurance which tells you he has rehearsed it. He wore a cloak with the collar raised, and, as Jago had said, gloves that did not quite fit. The cane in his hand had a knob that took the light like a little moon. He closed the door without sound and stood listening. Satisfied, he moved to the inner room, set the cane down upon the desk, and went upon one knee at the hearth like a lover about to make a declaration to the tiles. Holmes did not move. He only spoke, and his voice had in it a note of civility so cool that for an instant the intruder looked up with the bewilderment of a man caught in his own drawing-room. "Mr. Bromley," said Holmes, "you mislay your cane." "Allow me," Lestrade was upon him before the name had gone cold. The man sprang, but the inspector knows that spring as a ferret knows a rabbit-hole. The truncheon described its modest arc, and the silver knob rattled upon the boards. In another heartbeat the wrists were ringed, and the cloak disgorged a bundle of papers which smelt of hot sealing wax, though they had not yet known the flame. "Mr. Bromley," Holmes repeated, rising now and regarding our captive as a naturalist regards a moth at last under glass. "Land steward to Sir Adrian Harrowby, late of Norwood, purchaser of wax and lampblack, adviser of nervous clerks, friend of no barber. Your presence here saves us a visit to your master." "It is an economy for which I thank you." The man's face, which had the freckled sallowness of those who spend their years between field and office, went first white and then a deep, unhappy red. "You have no right," he said hoarsely, with that honest indignation which dishonesty often believes to be a defence. "I serve my employer." "The case is hard. The land wanted regularizing. The deed was confused. What is a line on paper when a boundary has run for years, in fact?" Holmes's eyebrows rose. "Ah, the old plea. That truth is what you draw with the thicker pencil. Spare us. You will sit, if you please. You will remove nothing from your pockets. You will consider your words as if they were to be read aloud to a bench. The law is present in Mr. Lestrade. Charity is present in Dr. Watson, and in me, if you seek it, there is the possibility that your master's name may appear upon fewer lips than your own." The struggle in the man's jaw was visible. I have rarely seen conscience and fear wrestle so nakedly. At last he said, very low, "Sir Adrian knows of nothing. He desired, he permitted, he was told that the truth could be presented more clearly. He never named a clerk, nor sent a man by night. He asked results. I, Mr. Kelway, found the means." Lestrade's pencil scratched softly. "Very good, Mr. Bromley. It will not be forgotten that you keep your master's shadow out of the lamplight. It is not always the counsel I receive in such rooms." Holmes examined the bundle the cloak had given up. It contained, besides a small housebreaking tool, a folded list of parcels, wax, wafer, ribbon, an address for a van to be taken this day only to a lock-up near the river, and, most curious, a neatly drawn little plan of Mr. Whitcomb's study in the passage beneath, annotated with initials V at the hatch, B at the study, and K at the lane. Confidences upon paper, Holmes observed. You gentlemen are too fond of them. Your plan will travel to Somerset House tomorrow, where it will hang like a moral in a clerk's closet. Mr. Bromley, will you add a brief statement of your present visit, the hour, and the purpose? If you choose a lie, pray make it a good one. A poor lie will cost you more than the truth. He chose the truth. Men of his stamp often do when the first wall has fallen. They have lived too long with fields and figures to keep much taste for melodrama. He wrote, he signed, he sat with his head lowered, while Lestrade made the small, hard sounds that go with paper folded for custody. When at last the inspector led him out, Holmes stood a moment with his hand upon the back of Kelway's chair, looking down at the hearth where no tile had been disturbed. 3 hands, he said, half to himself. A plan, a runner, and a steward. Each made the others bold. If the steward had been honest, the plan would have remained a fancy. If the runner had been dull, the steward would have lacked courage. If the plan had been clean, the runner would have found no employment. Take away anyone, and the door stays shut. It is the arithmetic of crime, Watson. Our work is to reduce the equation. We were in Baker Street before midnight. I confess to a weight of weariness that made even my pen heavy. Holmes, however, after a single pipe, laid out upon the table the modest trophies of the day, the stationer's ledger scrap in my memory, Jago's schedule in his eye, the steward's statement, the clerk's, the copyist's, the small drawing of the passage, and, with a little turn of his wrist, arranged them as a mathematician sets his symbols to make a proof. Now, he said, leaning back, his lashes lowered, you shall have tomorrow, if the court be reasonable, the story in straight lines. I will draw it for you. It began with a hatch and a habit. It continued with a decorator's receipt. It flowered in flour and graphite. It spread into wax and lamp black. It broke upon a bell and a boy. And it will end, if there is any poetry left in justice, in a phrase from the bench that will teach a solicitor to let doors alone. Sleep, Watson. I have a page to write for Lestrade, and then— the faintest mock solemnity touched his tone. The consolations of lunch which I promised you. A man should not lie to his chronicler. I left him to his neat piles and went gratefully to my bed. The last image that drifted across my drowsing mind was of an oak plug, flush with a jamb, glimmering faintly where a hole had been. It seemed to me emblematic, not only of a house restored to honour, but of that principle my friend served so tirelessly, that what has been misused may be mended, and that even a door which once refused to stay shut can, by honest hands and a little glue, be taught again its proper duty. It was upon the 3rd morning after Kelway's arrest that the case found its natural close. Holmes and I were summoned to the court, where the judge, with the clerk's statement spread before him and the counterfeit deed set alongside the original, gave his pronouncement. His words, though measured, carried a quiet severity that left no doubt as to Kelway's fate. The deed lodged in fraud was struck from the record, the copy impounded as evidence. The conveyance in Whitcomb's charge was confirmed genuine and beyond reproach. Mr. Whitcomb himself sat pale but resolute through the proceedings, his reputation restored as swiftly as it had been imperilled. When it was over, he grasped Holmes by both hands with an emotion that overcame even his lawyerly restraint. You have given me back more than a case, sir. You have returned me my honour, my practice, and my wife's peace. Holmes received this torrent with his usual composure, only remarking, You owe your peace, sir, to vigilance, not to me. Remember that locks are but symbols. It is the watchfulness of the mind that keeps the true door secure. The fate of the culprits followed swiftly. Kelway, exposed by the testimony of his own clerk and steward, confessed to his part in the conspiracy and was struck off the rolls, his career ending in ignominy. Vale, the scarred runner, turned state's evidence in hope of leniency, though Holmes observed that a man who lives between floors seldom walks straight when once released. Bromley, the steward, accepted his share of punishment with a dour resignation, insisting to the last that he had served his master's interest more than his own. As for Colebrook and Blenkins, their cooperation saved them the harsher penalties. Holmes arranged that their weak consciences be recorded as cautionary examples for their profession. The household at Norwood settled once more into its quiet rhythm. Mrs. Whitcomb, though still pale, moved about her rooms without the dread that had clung to her. Ellen returned to her tasks, Briggs to his severity, and young Thomas, chastened by his peril, seemed determined to earn back the trust he had nearly squandered. Holmes advised Whitcomb to keep the boy, saying only, "A lad who has touched the edge of a crime and recoiled from it will cleave thereafter to honesty more fiercely than one who has never been tempted." As we rode back to Baker Street after the final sitting, I ventured, "It is a curious matter, Holmes, that a door which would not stay shut should open such a labyrinth of deceit." He smiled faintly. "Not curious, Watson, but inevitable. Crime dresses itself in marvels to frighten fools, but behind every ghost lies a wire, a hole, and a hand eager for profit. In this case the trick was a bolt withdrawn from below, but the real mechanism was greed. Remove the one and the door closes, expose the other and the law enters. That is all I could not resist observing. And yet, without your eye for trifles, the smear of graphite, the chip at the shutter, the flower disturbed. We might all have believed in a phantom. Holmes drew thoughtfully upon his pipe. Trifles, Watson, are the hinges upon which truth turns. To the careless eye they are nothing. To the trained they are the difference between a house haunted by spectres and one visited by rogues. It is ever thus the fog was lifting as our cab rattled along the Strand, the pale winter sun breaking through to gild the river and throw long shadows across the bridges. Holmes leaned back with a sigh of rare content. "The door is shut, Watson." "Let us leave it so. There are other doors in London that wait to be opened, by those who think themselves clever, and by me, in turn, to be closed again." And with that reflection the case of the door that refused to stay shut passed into my chronicles, a testament not to ghosts nor miracles, but to the unyielding precision of Sherlock Holmes, who saw in every bolt and panel the map of human cunning, and in every trace of dust the handwriting of crime.